Tonight on Ukraine Today, Berlin peace talks. What did Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy discuss and what was agreed on with Trump's special envoys Kushner and Steve Witkoff? Intriguing poll results. How many Ukrainians are ready to give up territory in exchange for a ceasefire? The battlefield, Russia. Ukraine struck a number of strategic targets in the Moscow, Belgorod and Rostov regions. Occupation deadlines. Why is dissatisfaction growing in the Kremlin toward the head of Russia's so-called general staff? Terror attack in Australia. The death toll from an armed attack on people celebrating Hanukkah in Sydney has risen to 15. All this and more right now. Hello, I'm Volodymyr and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, give this video a like and let's get started. We begin with the terror attack in Australia. The number of victims on an armed assault on people celebrating Hanukkah in Sydney has risen to 15. The attackers were a father and son, Sajjad and Navid Akram. One terrorist was neutralized at the scene, the other is in hospital now. Police have classified the attack as an act of anti-Semitism. Our condolences go out to the families and loved ones of those killed and wish the injured a full recovery. And despite everything, happy Hanukkah to everyone who celebrates and even to those who do not. Because Hanukkah is about the victory of light over darkness, about strength of spirit, mutual support and, in many ways, about the maturity of a society. More light to all of us, in every positive sense of the word. Now to events in Ukraine and around Ukraine. So, Ukraine has struck a number of strategic targets inside Russia. Drones reached the Moscow regions as well as Belgorod and Rostov regions. There are reports of strikes on thermal power plants, power lines, a gas processing facility and an oil refinery. At Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport, the so-called carpet plan Kovyor was introduced, a temporary ban of takeoffs and landings. Earlier, Ukrainian drones hit a Russian fuel train in temporarily occupied Crimea. An oil depot was attacked also. In the Donetsk region, Ukraine's Special Operation Forces struck an electronic warfare station and an enemy FPV drone operator training center. According to Deep State, Russian forces have occupied the village of Tovste in the Donetsk region, previously known as Tolstoy. The enemy also advanced near Yampil and in Siversk. More details on the battlefield situation in the report.
The Ukrainian armed forces have begun the deoccupation of Pokrovsk. In just a couple of weeks, more than 15 square kilometers have been liberated in the city, and the defense forces continue to build on their success.
For example, this week alone, the area under the control of the defense forces in Pokrovsk has increased by at least 3 square kilometers. Today, that figure stands at 16 square kilometers. Accordingly, out of the total area of 29 square kilometers, the total area of the city of Pokrovsk. So, as we can see today, more than half of the city is already under the control of the defense forces.
At the same time, the enemy does not stop trying to advance in this direction, as they like to say on Russian TV, while actually achieving negative results. Another confirmation of this was a recent video from Ukrainian drone operators who, apparently in a single attack, stopped an entire column of Russian equipment on the outskirts of the city.
When they burn so powerfully and brightly, it means they were destroyed literally in the course of one swift raid. In other words, they are lined up first of all in a tightrope. That is, they were taken out while on the move. And the strike was obviously a single simultaneous attack. All 7 vehicles were hit at once. Again, I want to emphasize, this is not everything that was moving toward Pokrovsk. This is only what happened to be caught on camera by this particular drone.
At the same time, the Ukrainian command notes that the intensity of assaults on Pokrovsk is beginning to decrease. According to Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrskyi, this is due to the incredible losses suffered by Russian units. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's mobilization capabilities no longer cover the occupiers' losses at the front, which consistently exceed 1,000 people per day.
It has decreased precisely because while the Russians are of course carrying out regroupings and rotating their personnel, they are now facing the reality that the losses for the ruins of Pokrovsk are enormous. As a result, they are indeed reducing the intensity of combat operations, specifically on the part of Russian units.
Moreover, the destruction of the enemy here is taking place not only along the line of contact, but also at the stage of forming assault groups, as well as the destruction of the occupiers' stockpiles in the rear units of the Russian Federation.
Just last night, a strike was carried out in the Donetsk direction, including in Pokrovsky, targeting the command posts of the 76th Airborne Division of the Russian Federation. Obviously, losses among the officer corps, as I mentioned, certainly reduced the troops' ability to be effectively commanded. Again, we're talking about the destruction of logistics. This includes warehouses, arsenals, ammunition, equipment, everything necessary for conducting combat.
A separate tragedy for the Russians is unfolding in the Kupiansk direction. There, the day before, the 429th Separate Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment destroyed a pipe that the enemy had been using to infiltrate personnel into the city. According to the military, during reconnaissance, they discovered an unusual but critically important logistics channel. A gas pipe that the enemy used to transfer their personnel to the northern outskirts of Kupiansk. It was a safe route that allowed the enemy to build up forces while bypassing fire control. 3 tons of explosives solved this problem once and for all. At the same time, President Zelenskyy's recent visit to Kupiansk completely threw off the Russian propagandists, who have been claiming for over a month that the city is under their control.
Against this backdrop, a real hysteria broke out in Russian Z-channels. After all, just last month, Putin and his generals personally claimed that Kupiansk had supposedly been taken. Moreover, this was done almost several times in a row. Now, in an attempt to somehow explain the failure, Z-bloggers have started spreading information, obviously disinformation, that supposedly up to 4,000 former convicts, allegedly armed with heavy equipment, attacked Kupiansk. This is already the blatant agony of Russian propaganda.
And at this moment, more than ever, I want to remind the bunker dweller of his own statement.
The significant events that took place in Kupiansk will, without a doubt, inevitably be repeated at other crucial sections of the front. Perhaps not as quickly as we would ideally like, but their occurrence is absolutely inevitable, and overall that genuinely suits our objectives.
At the same time, in order to divert the attention of the Ukrainian armed forces from Donbass, the Russian group has become more active in the south of our country. Fierce fighting is taking place today in the Hulyapol direction, but despite the fact that the number of assaults here has increased by 20%, the defense forces continue to hold their positions.
Obviously, Russia will be forced to increase its efforts north of Hulyapol in the Hulyapol direction. This is a key section for the defense of the entire Hulyapol defensive district of the Ukrainian armed forces. At the same time, launching an offensive simultaneously along the entire front of the 5th Separate Brigade and a large part of the 36th sector is becoming increasingly problematic for Russia. The stretching of forces and resources across a rather wide front is objectively and gradually leading to a decrease in its offensive capabilities.
At the same time, the defense forces are not forgetting to target the rear units of the Russian Federation, as well as Putin's military purse. For example, last night in occupied Crimea, oil depots and power stations were burning, and the peninsula itself came under a massive attack. Russian public channels reported dozens of missiles and drones coming from Ukraine. In particular, the Crimean Wind Channel reports that in Simferopol, an oil depot is burning near the local power station. Published photos and videos capture a large-scale fire. In addition, there are reports of air defense systems operating and explosions in other cities of the occupied peninsula: Feodosia, Saki, Jankoy, Sevastopol, as well as near the Gvardeyskaya air base outside Simferopol. Russian territories also came under attack. Local social media channels report strikes on a power plant in Smolensk and an oil depot in Uryupinsk, Volgograd region. Fires broke out at the sites.
According to open sources, there are 18 storage tanks at the Alpha Oil LLC oil depot in Uryupinsk. It receives petroleum products from suppliers, for example from refineries or via transport, stores them in tanks, and then ships them out for further delivery to customers.
Also, last night, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces units managed to destroy an entire train carrying fuel for the occupiers in Crimea. The strike was carried out using the now legendary FP2 drones.
Over the past 24 hours alone, Russia has lost at least 980 occupiers killed and wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, total Russian losses now stand at 1,189,470 troops. In addition, over the last day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 10 armored combat vehicles, 64 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of enemy military equipment. Dissatisfaction is growing in the Kremlin toward the head of Russia's so-called General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. Why? Because he failed to meet the occupation deadlines for Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. This is reported by representatives of the partisan movement Atesh. According to them, chaos reigns in Russia's high military offices, as the real situation on the front lines looks nothing like what is coming from the mouth of dictator Putin and his inner circle. Unfortunately, this does not stop the occupiers from shelling peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns. Air defense forces neutralized 133 out of 153 drones launched by Russia overnight at northern, southern and eastern Ukraine. Sadly, 17 drones hit 10 locations. In particular, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, infrastructure and transport facilities were damaged. There are injured civilians. Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. Now is a perfect moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video and share it. Please do it. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is on an official visit to Berlin. There he is holding meetings with Trump's special envoys, Kushner and Witkoff. They are discussing ways to end Russia's war against Ukraine, the country's recovery and security guarantees. Yesterday, the talks lasted for more than 5 hours. The work continues. It is important to note that Kyiv has already provided Washington with its own version of a peace plan. It is based on the document promoted by President Trump, but with provisions removed that crossed Ukraine's red lines, most notably territorial concessions. Here are the details.
Ukraine is rewriting and modifying points of Trump's peace plan, focusing on issues that are key for Ukrainians.
Zelenskyy is trying to rewrite Trump's peace plan, not reject it. The president of Ukraine wants to take a constructive stance toward the White House's proposal without losing the trust of his people.
In negotiations with the Americans, Ukraine has taken an active position. In an effort to maintain Washington's support during negotiations, Kyiv uses a formula that diplomatic circles describe as "we agree," but insist on holding elections. Ukraine agrees, but
There were signals from the US, personally from President Trump, about holding presidential elections in Ukraine. I'm not clinging to my seat. There will be elections if our partners can ensure security. Deputies are preparing options.
Since Donald Trump is opposed to Ukraine joining NATO, Kyiv is offering an alternative, security guarantees in the form of bilateral agreements, which must be approved by the US Congress.
Security must be ensured for Ukraine absolutely and unequivocally, and Ukraine will not agree to accept any kind of half-baked substitutes or alternatives. And there's absolutely no point in expecting or anticipating a Minsk III or Budapest II today at this moment.
A refusal to control the territories of Donbas under Ukrainian administration. Ukraine and Europe call it a reward for the Russian aggressor, while simultaneously demonstrating that Russia's territorial demands are based on hypocrisy as well. In
Lupyansk and the city of Krasnoarmysk, the enemy ended up blocked and surrounded. By the way, I discussed this issue with the commanders of the relevant group. They have no objection, Andrei Andreevich, no objection to allowing representatives of the media, foreign journalists, into the enemy's encirclement zone.
Today, the Kupiansk direction. Our soldiers here are achieving results for Ukraine. The Russians talked a lot about Kupiansk. We see it. I congratulated the guys. Thank you to every unit, to everyone fighting here, to everyone destroying the occupiers. Today, it is very important to achieve results at the front so that Ukraine can achieve results in diplomacy. In
the most difficult issues in negotiations with the Americans, leaders provide important assistance to Kyiv. European states.
Europe understands perfectly well where the United States is heading within the framework of its new security doctrine. I think that Europe is well aware that in this particular configuration of desires or wishes of the President of the United States, Trump-Ukraine can serve as a guarantee of security for Europe. But at the same time, Europe must provide important support and perhaps in some areas even replace the United States for Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Reuters reports that President Zelenskyy is open to Ukraine giving up its aspiration to join NATO in exchange for security guarantees. From my side, I would add NATO membership is security guarantees. However, if our Western partners insist that the alliance should remain without the most experienced army in Europe, the Ukrainian one, and Ukraine in turn without NATO, then Kyiv is ready to listen to and consider alternative proposals. So how do Ukrainians themselves view Russia's war, peace talks, and the actions of their president, you may ask? A poll conducted by Kyiv International Institute of Sociology shows that a majority, 63%, are ready to endure the war for as long as necessary. Only 9% believe it will end before the beginning of 2026. 72% support a peace plan with a frozen front line and security guarantees, but without recognizing temporarily occupied territories as Russian. 61% say they trust President Zelenskyy, and only 9% want presidential election before the end of war. Economists in Russia are sounding the alarm. Money is running out. This is unfortunately a process rather than a single event, but it is a painful one. The central bank is selling strategic gold reserves. Ordinary people are feeling the crisis and growing resentful, quietly of course, so as not to upset Putin. More on what is happening to Russia's economy in the report.
Russia is entering the most difficult period of the war, and it's all because of the economy.
We decided that out of all the available tools, it would be more honest, straightforward, and reliable to simply go ahead with this increase. It's a temporary increase, I hope, but an increase nonetheless.
Putin continues to convince his people that he has everything under control and that everything is going according to plan. Supposedly there are successes at the front, and supposedly the economy is growing. Moreover, he boldly declares that Russia is even ready for war with Europe if necessary. But in reality, the situation is far from comfortable. This was vividly demonstrated at the front by the situation in Kupiansk, in the Kharkiv region.
The West Group liberated the city of Kupiansk. In other words, that's it, it's completely finished. That's correct, the city is under our control.
At the same time, Kupiansk has not been captured. On the contrary, Russian troops there have found themselves surrounded. And in the economic sphere, the sharp increase in taxes clearly highlights the problems. After all, they need to find money somewhere to continue the war.
The corresponding government plan has already been prepared as well. This is very important. We have discussed this repeatedly. In connection with the VAT increase, we need to make sure that nothing goes into the shadows, that everything operates legally, and that the corresponding revenues go to the budget.
Experts agree that the Russian economy is entering its most difficult period since the start of the full-scale war.
Russia, from being a gas station, has now turned into a country that it is now importing light petroleum products. This is due both to sanctions and to the strikes by Ukrainian drones, which have shut down 20% of Russian oil refining.
The increase in military spending no longer stimulates the economy, and the budget deficit is growing, while Russia has no foreign investment or loans. Even China didn't help.
Putin's trip to China and his request to his Chinese comrades to grant the Russian Federation a stabilization loan in yuan ended with nothing. So, as of today, Russia has no mechanisms for external borrowing at all. And the last fund they used to cover the budget deficit, starting from 2022, the National Wealth Fund, is now almost completely depleted. They started the war with 12 trillion in the fund. Now there is less than 2 trillion left in the fund.
Putin wanted so badly to bring the Soviet Union back to Russia that he didn't even notice how he dragged his country to this rock bottom.
Do you understand what the point is? Why do we say that the situation in Russia is even worse? At that time, the Soviet Union, for the most part, survived thanks to a huge amount of external borrowing. So, if you look at the trend, thank you. The debt of the Soviet Union in the last 7 years before its collapse was growing almost exponentially. Today, the Russian Federation has no borrowings. It is cut off from international financial markets. The collapse of the Soviet Union did not happen because of a revolt, not because of a revolution, but simply because the economy could not withstand it.
So the Kremlin is forced to raise taxes and increase domestic borrowing, which fuels inflation.
Raising taxes on businesses is basically like killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. If we carefully look at the current situation in the non-military civilian sectors of the Russian economy in the present day, it is truly an absolute and complete nightmare.
Despite the repressive system, public discontent is growing, especially in the regions. Funds for the regions Putin is simply crushing small business with his taxes. Entrepreneurs even ask Putin not to raise taxes. But the crisis hasn't just affected small businesses. Throughout this year, the media has repeatedly reported that large enterprises have started laying off employees because they can't pay their wages.
We are a team in the Nizhny Tagil division, Novolex company, working on the construction site of the Volkovskaya deposit third phase. Construction of a beneficiation plant for processing copper iron at the Anadyevsky mining site, Volkovsky Gok, near the city of Kushla, in Sverdlovsk region, where we are currently located. We would like to inform you that this organization has not paid advances or salaries for 2 months now.
At the same time, Avtovaz, which the Kremlin wants to present as the pride of the Russian automotive industry, is losing its employees. Since September alone, Avtovaz has cut salaries from 100,000 to 50,000. They canceled bonuses and overtime pay. People have started leaving the company and the cars are being produced in terrible condition. They break down right in the showrooms.
Did yours break down right here in the showroom?
No, it didn't break down. It's
Patina and this part. Did the factory just decide not to finish it?
The crisis has also affected such an important sector in Russia as the nuclear industry. In the Ulyanovsk region, about 300 builders of a nuclear facility went on strike because they weren't paid their wages. They refused to continue working.
Lately, since June, we've been experiencing delays in our salaries. Every month, the delay is a month, sometimes a month and a half. Accordingly, the delay is significant, especially for those on business trips.
Previously, workers at Nagres and Primorye did something similar. They spent the night at the facility and even threatened to jump off the roofs. And all of this happened because welders, electricians, and assemblers were forced to take extreme measures, protesting against unpaid wages. And these are just a few cases out of hundreds of others. The Kremlin is trying to squeeze as much money as possible from within the country. That's why there are already ideas being voiced about taxes for the childless. If they don't increase the birth rate, let them pay too.
Then go ahead and pay, dear ones. What? A tax for a decent old age if you don't want to have children.
There is no external lending. Even Russia's oil, as in a gas station country, has to be imported. Experts to a person are quite shocked by such Kremlin policies.
What can be said about the state of the Russian economy when the central bank has officially announced that it is starting to sell off its strategic gold reserves?
Interestingly, the mood of the people clearly shows that they are not willing to keep living like this. According to sociologists, already 88% of Russians want the war to end, even though back in 2022, the majority supported Putin. But today, everyone has to tighten their belts. Factory workers, ordinary Russians, and even the military. After all, despite the promised millions for killing in Ukraine, Russian soldiers are often left with nothing. The war no longer inspires pride or optimism among the population. And the Kremlin understands this perfectly well. But does that stop Putin from dragging his country down and drowning in this war?
When we talk about the Russian Federation, we need to understand that what is happening there now is extremely similar to what happened in the Soviet Union. This includes the harshest dictatorship. It also involves a very serious strengthening of law enforcement, and so I wouldn't harbor any truly great illusions that Russia will suddenly open up tomorrow and take to the streets in a massive, widespread protest, you know.
That's why Putin couldn't come up with anything better than to ensure his own peace of mind, so that people wouldn't even think about protesting or rebelling.
Do you know which budget areas for 2026? In the Russian Federation, these areas received the largest increase in funding compared to 2025. the police, the National Guard, and state propaganda. In fact, in 2026, funding for propaganda was increased by 1.8 times. Billions of rubles.
The Kremlin is increasing pressure on the people, but at the same time understands that ending the war or reducing military spending won't instantly solve all the problems. After all, the country's economy has become dependent on the military industry. And that's where the vicious circle closes. Peace will bring new difficulties, while continuing the war will push the economic crisis to a whole new low. A country that was once developing has now backed itself into a corner. It seems even Putin himself no longer knows what to do about it, so he keeps on lying. And Russians keep enduring it, so as not to anger Tsar Father Putin.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Thanks for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. See you next time.